A missionary dies during surgery, and upon encountering Jesus, he reveals to her a truth that transforms everything she believed about prayer. Prepare to hear an experience that challenges everything you've been taught. My name is Luz Maria Ramirez Torres, and for 18 years I served as a missionary in marginalized communities in Guadalajara, Jalisco. I was born into a deeply Catholic family in Morelia, Michoacan, where from childhood I was taught to pray the rosary, to attend Mass every Sunday without fail, and to intercede for others with tireless fervor. At 24, I felt the call to missionary service and moved to Guadalajara to work with communities living in extreme poverty on the outskirts of the metropolitan area. My entire life revolved around prayer, service, and faith. I spent hours on my knees in the chapel, reciting novenas, forming prayer chains, pleading with God for healing, for provision, for miracles for the families who were suffering so much. I believed with all my heart that I knew the power of prayer, that I understood how to communicate with the Almighty. But on March 16, 2023, when my heart stopped beating during emergency surgery at the Civil Hospital of Guadalajara, I discovered a truth so profound, so transformative, that everything I had practiced for almost 2 decades turned out to be just the first step on an endless ladder toward a true encounter with God. That day dawned like any other Tuesday. I got up at 5 a.m., I said my usual 30-minute morning prayer, I recited the Lord's Prayer 7 times, I prayed for the needs of the families I would be visiting that day and left for the Loma Dorada neighborhood, where we had scheduled home visits. The pain began around 10 o'clock a.m., an intense burning in my abdomen that I initially ignored, thinking it was just indigestion from the coffee I had drunk without breakfast. By 2 o'clock p.m., the pain was unbearable, as if someone were twisting my insides with a red-hot knife. My fellow missionaries, Patricia and Rocio, rushed me to the civil hospital because I could no longer even walk upright. The doctors quickly determined that I had acute appendicitis that had already perforated and that I needed immediate surgery to avoid generalized peritonitis, which could kill me within hours. I remember being in the preoperative room, connected to IVs and monitors, listening to the instructions of Drive Hector Zamora Gutierrez, the surgeon who would be treating me. My mind was in automatic prayer mode. Our Lady of Guadalupe, protect me, Lord Jesus, may everything go well. Heavenly Father, guide the doctor's hands. These were the same prayers I had said thousands of times for other people, now directed toward my own situation. Sincere, devout prayers, full of faith, but prayers that came from a place of fear, of the need, of desperate supplication before a God I imagined watching me from on high, deciding whether or not to grant my request. The anesthesia began to take effect, and I remember seeing the operating room lights fade as the anesthesiologist, Drive Fernando Rivas Sanchez, told me to count backward from 100, 99, 98, 97, and then total darkness. I don't know how much time passed in that absolute nothingness, but suddenly there was a change. I didn't wake up in the normal sense, but my consciousness expanded in a way I had never experienced before. I was no longer asleep under anesthesia, but I wasn't awake in my body either. I was in a completely different state, more awake than ever before in my life, more aware, more lucid than ever before. A moment of normal wakefulness. I found myself floating above the operating table, viewing my own body from above. I could see Drive Zamora with his hands inside my open abdomen. I could see the nurses moving urgently. I could see the monitors displaying erratic lines and hear the constant, alarming beep that indicated something was terribly wrong. I heard Drive Rivas say in a tense voice that I was losing my pulse, that my blood pressure was dropping dangerously. I saw them pull out the defibrillator and how my body convulsed with each electrical shock. It was strange to see all of this without feeling panic, without feeling fear. There was absolute calm, a sense of being okay, even though my physical body was clearly in severe crisis. Then, my attention shifted from the surgical scene to something much more powerful. There was a presence in the room, something I couldn't see with my physical eyes when I was in my body, but which was now absolutely evident. It was as if the walls of the operating room had become transparent, and behind them existed another dimension, another reality that had always been there, but invisible to normal senses, and from that other dimension emanated a light, but it wasn't light as we know it. It was living light, conscious light, light that contained love, peace, wisdom, purity, all at once. It didn't frighten me, on the contrary, it drew me in with an irresistible force, as if that light were my true home, and I had been away for too long. I began to move toward that light, away from the operating room, away from my body lying on the table. I went through what seemed like a tunnel, although tunnel isn't the right word, because there weren't solid walls, but rather currents of light that flowed, that danced, that sang with frequencies that I could hear not with my ears, but with my whole being. The love emanating from that light was so intense, so pure, so unconditional, that I began to cry, even though I no longer had physical eyes to produce tears. It was a cry of profound relief, of recognition, like when a lost child finally finds their mother after hours of terrified searching. When I emerged from the tunnel, I found myself in a place I cannot adequately describe with words in Spanish or any human language. It wasn't simply a beautiful place, it was beauty itself in its purest and most concentrated form. There were colors that don't exist on Earth, shades that have no name, combinations that defy all logic of our visual spectrum. There were sounds that were simultaneously music and silence, perfect harmony that resonated at frequencies that made every particle of my spiritual being vibrate. The air, if it can be called air, was charged with a peace so dense, so tangible, that it felt like immersing myself in an ocean of absolute serenity. And there, at the center of it all, surrounded by that glorious light, but clearly distinguishable from it, was Jesus. I recognized him instantly, not because he resembled the images I had seen in churches and holy cards throughout my life, but because my spirit knew him with a certainty that goes beyond any intellectual understanding. It was as if every cell of my spiritual being had a cellular memory of him, as if I had known him since before I was born, since before I existed in human form. His eyes, wow, his eyes contained oceans of compassion, universes of wisdom, eternities of pure love. When he looked at me, I didn't feel the judgment I had been told so many times would come when I met the Lord. There was no review of my sins, no pointing out of my failings. There was only love, a love so complete, so absolute, so unconditional. Love instantly dissolved every fear, every insecurity, every shadow of doubt that I had carried throughout my life. He extended his hands toward me, and I could see the nail marks, not as open, bleeding wounds, but as luminous seals of sacrificial love. When he spoke, his voice didn't come from outside, but resonated within me, as if each word were spoken directly into my heart, my mind, my soul simultaneously. Luz Maria, he said, and the way he pronounced my name made me feel that it was the first time I had truly been called by my real name. You have served faithfully, you have loved sincerely, you have prayed fervently, but there is something I need to show you, something that changed everything before every miracle I performed on earth, something the church has forgotten to teach, something hidden in plain sight in the scriptures, but few discover. I remained silent, completely absorbed in his presence. He continued speaking, and as he did, profound understandings began to form in my consciousness, not as abstract thoughts, but as experiential knowledge etched deep within my being. During all these years you have prayed, Luz Maria, you have spoken to me as if I were far away, as if I were somewhere distant in heaven waiting to hear your words so I could decide whether or not to help. You have pleaded, you have interceded, you have begged with tears and fervor, and although your heart was sincere and your faith was real, you were praying from a place of separation, from a place of need, from a place of distance. His words were not a rebuke, but a revelation spoken with infinite tenderness. But Luz Maria, that is not what I did when I prayed, that is not the method I practiced before raising Lazarus from the dead, before healing the paralytic, before multiplying the loaves and fishes, before calming the storm on the Sea of Galilee. Let me show you what was really happening before each miracle, what was happening inside me before I uttered any word of power. Suddenly, The scene around me changed. We were no longer in that place of indescribable light, but I was seeing a memory, a scene from the past, as if projected onto a living, three-dimensional screen. I saw Jesus walking toward Lazarus's tomb in Bethany. I saw the sisters Mary and Martha weeping. I saw the assembled crowd. I saw the pain and despair on every face. But what struck me was what I could see in Jesus himself, something that the Gospels mention, but that no one had ever truly taught me to understand. Before reaching the tomb, I saw Jesus stop. It wasn't a noticeable physical pause that the people around could see, but inside him there was a profound movement, a withdrawal inward, a descent into a place of absolute silence. It was like watching layers of consciousness unfold, moving from the surface into the depths. I saw that his conscious mind, with all its thoughts and perceptions of the external world, began to quiet down. I saw that his sense of being Jesus the man, Jesus the teacher, Jesus the Son of Mary, began to gently dissolve, and in that space of profound silence that opened up, something else emerged, a unified consciousness that it was not just Jesus, but Jesus completely one with the Father. There were no two separate wills at that moment. There was no Jesus asking the Father to do something. There was only one will, one single consciousness, one single power acting, and from that place of absolute union, I saw that Jesus could see the resurrection of Lazarus not as something future that he was waiting to happen, but as something that was already complete in the invisible realm, in the dimension of cause, on the plane where all things are possible, because they are not limited by time or matter. Then I heard the words Jesus spoke at the tomb, words recorded in the Gospel of John, chapter 11, verse 41, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." Unconditional love instantly dissolved every fear, every insecurity, every shadow of doubt that I had carried throughout my life. He extended his hands toward me, and I could see the nail marks, not as open, bleeding wounds, but as luminous seals of sacrificial love. When he spoke, his voice didn't come from outside, but resonated within me, as if each word were spoken directly into my heart, my mind, my soul simultaneously. "Luz Maria," he said, and the way he pronounced my name made me feel that it was the first time I had truly been called by my real name. "You have served faithfully, you have loved sincerely, you have prayed fervently, but there is something I need to show you, something that changed everything before every miracle I performed on earth, something the church has forgotten to teach, something hidden in plain sight in the scriptures, but few discover." I remained silent, completely absorbed in his presence. He continued speaking, and as he did, profound understandings began to form in my consciousness, not as abstract thoughts, but as experiential knowledge etched deep within my being. "During all these years you have prayed, Luz Maria. You have spoken to me as if I were far away, as if I were somewhere distant in heaven waiting to hear your words so I could decide whether or not to help. You have pleaded, you have interceded, you have begged with tears and fervor, and although your heart was sincere and your faith was real, you were praying from a place of separation, from a place of need, from a place of distance." His words were not a rebuke, but a revelation spoken with infinite tenderness. "But Luz Maria, that is not what I did when I prayed. That is not the method I practiced before raising Lazarus from the dead, before healing the paralytic, before multiplying the loaves and fishes, before calming the storm on the Sea of Galilee. Let me show you what was really happening before each miracle, what was happening inside me before I uttered any word of power." Suddenly, the scene around me changed. We were no longer in that place of indescribable light, but I was seeing a memory, a scene from the past, as if projected onto a living, three-dimensional screen. I saw Jesus walking toward Lazarus's tomb in Bethany. I saw the sisters Mary and Martha weeping. I saw the assembled crowd. I saw the pain and despair on every face. But what struck me was what I could see in Jesus himself, something that the Gospels mention, but that no one had ever truly taught me to understand. Before reaching the tomb, I saw Jesus stop. It wasn't a noticeable physical pause that the people around could see, but inside him there was a profound movement, a withdrawal inward, a descent into a place of absolute silence. It was like watching layers of consciousness unfold, moving from the surface into the depths. I saw that his conscious mind, with all its thoughts and perceptions of the external world, began to quiet down. I saw that his sense of being Jesus the man, Jesus the teacher, Jesus the Son of Mary, began to gently dissolve, and in that space of profound silence that opened up, something else emerged, a unified consciousness that it was not just Jesus, but Jesus completely one with the Father. There were no two separate wills at that moment, there was no Jesus asking the Father to do something, there was only one will, one single consciousness, one single power acting, and from that place of absolute union, I saw that Jesus could see the resurrection of Lazarus not as something future that he was waiting to happen, but as something that was already complete in the invisible realm, in the dimension of cause, on the plane where all things are possible, because they are not limited by time or matter. Then I heard the words Jesus spoke at the tomb, words recorded in the Gospel of John, chapter 11, verse 41, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." Note not physical movement, but a shift in attention, a reorientation of consciousness from the outside in, from the surface to the depths, and as I descended, I began to experience ever-deepening layers of silence. First, there was a stillness where verbal thoughts ceased, then a stillness where even mental images dissolved, afterward, a stillness where the very sense of being Luz Maria with my personal history, my worries, my identity, began to become transparent, less solid, less real, and finally, I arrived at a place, or rather a state of being, that I can only describe as pure presence. There were no thoughts there, no memory, no anticipation of the future, no fear because there was no separate self that could be threatened, there was no desire because there was no sense of lack, there was only pure awareness, pure existence, pure peace, pure love, and in that space, in that sacred silence that exists before thought, before identity, before separation, I felt the presence of God not as something distant or separate, but as the very essence of what I was at my deepest level. "This is the inner room," Jesus said softly, though his voice now came not from outside, but arose from that same profound silence. "This is the place where the Father dwells in secret, not far away in heaven as you were taught, but here, closer than your own breath, more intimate than your own heart. And when I told you to close the door, I was instructing you to completely seal your identification with the world of the senses, with the ego, with the talking mind, so that you could discover this place that has always been here waiting for you." As I remained in that state of union, Jesus continued to reveal truths that completely transformed my understanding of prayer. "Look, Luz Maria, all your life you have prayed from outside this door, you have spoken to God imagining that He is somewhere far away, separate from you, you have recited beautiful prayers, you have asked sincerely, you have interceded with passion. But all of that was prayer of separation. You were speaking to God, not from God. You were operating from the illusion that you and I are separate entities with potentially conflicting wills. But when you enter this inner room and close the door, when you descend into this place of profound silence and remain there until the illusion of separation dissolves, something radically different happens. You discover that there was never any real separation. The separation was only a belief, a perception based on identifying exclusively with your body and mind. But in your deepest essence, in this place of the inner room, you and the Father are one, not two entities trying to communicate across a distance, but a single consciousness, a single life, a single will. And when you pray from that place of oneness, everything changes. You are no longer asking God to change things, you are acknowledging that from the perspective of the inner realm, things have already changed, healing is complete, provision has already been released, the answer has already been given, because in the realm of cause, in the invisible dimension where all possibilities exist simultaneously, everything is already finished. The only thing missing is its manifestation in the visible physical world. That is why, when I was at Lazarus's tomb, I gave thanks in the past tense. Because from the inner room, from the place of total union with the Father, I saw that the resurrection was already complete in the invisible realm. It only needed to manifest in the visible. I wasn't waiting for it to happen, it had already happened. He was acknowledging that it had already happened, and that acknowledgement, that declaration from the place of union, is what allowed the invisible to become visible, the eternal to touch the temporal, heaven to manifest on earth. Jesus then showed me scene after scene of his earthly ministry. But now I could see what was happening within him before each miracle. Before healing the paralytic who was lowered through the roof, I saw Jesus withdraw inwardly for a moment, descend into the inner room, align himself completely with the Father until there was no separation, and from that place of union, he saw that the healing was complete. Only then did he speak the words of power, "Get up, take your mat and walk." But the words did not cause the healing. The words were the outward expression of a reality already established in the unseen. Before multiplying the loaves and fishes to feed 5,000 men, not counting women and children, I saw the same pattern. Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, raised his eyes to heaven, which doesn't mean he physically looked up, but rather that he raised his consciousness to the invisible realm and gave thanks, again, gratitude in the past tense for a multiplication that hadn't yet occurred on the physical plane. Because from the inner room, from total union, he saw that the multiplication was already complete. It only needed to manifest, and it manifested so abundantly that 12 baskets were left over. Before calming the storm on the Sea of Galilee, when the disciples were terrified, thinking they would drown, I saw that Jesus didn't panic, didn't plead with the Father to stop the storm. Instead, he withdrew to the inner room. Even amidst the external chaos, he aligned himself completely with the peace of the Father that exists beyond any physical circumstance, and from that place of perfect union, he spoke to the storm, "Be still, be silent," and the storm obeyed, not because the words has magical power, but because the words were spoken from the place of union, where there is no separation between the speaker and the source of all power. "Look, Luz Maria," Jesus continued with infinite patience, "every time I withdrew to solitary places to pray, every time I spent entire nights on the mountain, every time I withdrew from the crowds, it wasn't to rest physically or to recharge emotional energy, it was to realign myself, to return to the inner sanctum, to ensure that I was operating from the place of union and not from the separate mind, because it is very easy to slip back into the consciousness of separation when you are constantly immersed in the world of the senses and external demands. That is why I told my disciples that it was necessary for me to leave so that the Holy Spirit could come. While I was with them in physical form, they depended on me as if I were someone external and separate from them, but when the Spirit came, they discovered that the same power that operated through me was available within them, in their own inner room. Peter, who had denied me 3 times out of fear, was suddenly able to stand before thousands and preach with such power that 3,000 people were converted in a single day. What changed? Not his natural abilities, not his education, not his personal courage. What changed was that he discovered the inner room and learned to operate from there. Jesus then showed me something that broke my heart. He showed me how, throughout the centuries, as Christianity spread throughout the world, this inner method was gradually forgotten. It wasn't intentionally hidden by evil leaders, but it simply became impossible to systematize and teach on a large scale. You can't create a standardized training program to teach people how to enter the inner room. You can't certify priests and pastors in a technique that many of them have never experienced. You can't build a religious institution around a method that requires each person to do the inner work for themselves. So the church focused on what could be systematized: external rituals, doctrines that could be memorized, written prayers that could be recited, sacraments that could be administered. All these things have their place and value. But without the inner component, without the actual experience of entering the secret room and discovering union with God, they became empty shells, powerless forms, religion without a genuine relationship. I saw generation after generation of sincere Christians spend their entire lives praying fervently, fasting, serving, studying the scriptures, but they never learned to enter the room inner. They never discovered the place of union. They never experienced what I experienced before each miracle. They prayed to God, but they never learned to pray from God, and so, even though they were devout and sincere, they experienced so little of the supernatural power that flowed so naturally in the early church. Jesus looked at me with deep compassion. "Luz Maria, you have been one of them. For 18 years you have served faithfully, you have loved sincerely, you have prayed without ceasing, but, How many times did you actually enter the inner room, close the door, and remain in silence until the illusion of separation dissolved? How many times did you pray from the place of union instead of from the place of separation? How many times did you experience what I experienced before each miracle? Tears, if they can be called tears in a spiritual sense, flowed freely. Did I know the answer? Never, not once. In 18 years had I truly entered the inner room in the way Jesus described. I had spent thousands of hours praying, but always from outside the door, always from the consciousness of separation, always speaking to a God I imagined as distant, instead of discovering the God who dwells in the very center of my being. But now you know, Jesus said with infinite tenderness, and you will return, Luz Maria. Your work on earth is not yet finished. You will return to your body and live many more years, but when you return, you will take this knowledge with you, you will teach others to find the inner room, you will show them how to close the door, you will guide them to the experience of union that makes prayer not an act of supplication, but a state of being. He placed his hands on my spiritual heart, and I felt a transmission of knowledge, not as intellectual information, but as experiential understanding that was imprinted on every level of my being. Remember this, Luz Maria, the kingdom of heaven is not a place you go to when you die, it is a state of consciousness you enter while you are alive, and I said it is within you, within the inner room, within the sacred silence that exists beyond thought and before the ego's identity. When you learn to live from that place, when you learn to keep the door closed to the noise of the world and open only to the Father's presence, then your entire life becomes prayer. Then you no longer visit the inner room occasionally, you live in it constantly. Then every word you speak, every action you take, every thought you think flows from the place of union instead of from the place of separation. And when you speak from that place, things change, not because you have personal power, but because there is no longer a separate you blocking the flow of divine power. You have become transparent, a clear channel, an open door between heaven and earth, and through you what is already true in the invisible manifests in the visible. The healings that are already complete in the realm of cause become evident in the realm of effect. The provisions, which are already released in the eternal dimension, materialize in the temporal dimension. Jesus then showed me how to practice this when I returned. He showed me that it is not instantaneous, that the inner room opens gradually. It requires patience, daily practice, and a willingness to sit in what seems to be nothing, while your nervous system learns to recognize more subtle frequencies of consciousness. It opens, and each time you practice, it becomes a little easier, a little faster, a little deeper. Begin with simple stillness, he instructed me. Sit in a place where you will not be interrupted, close your physical eyes, begin to breathe consciously, not forcing your breath, but simply noticing it. With each exhalation, release a layer of tension, worry, and identification with your thoughts and emotions. Don't try to stop the thoughts, that only creates more resistance. Simply stop identifying with them, watch them pass like clouds in the sky without clinging to any of them. As you do this, you will begin to notice spaces between the thoughts, small moments of pure stillness. Focus your attention on those spaces. Each time you notice one, it expands a little. Eventually, the spaces become longer than the thoughts, and in those spaces, you begin to feel the presence, the living silence that exists before any thought arises. When you feel that, when you touch, even briefly, that living silence, don't rush, don't immediately begin making requests or reciting prayers. Simply remain there, feel the peace, acknowledge the presence, allow it to deepen, because the door to the inner room doesn't open with effort or willpower, it opens with recognition and abiding, and as you remain in that silence, you will gradually begin to experience what I experienced. The feeling that there is no separate you here and separate God there. There is only one consciousness, one presence, one love. And in that state of oneness, when you finally speak, whether aloud or in your quiet mind, you are not speaking to God hoping to be heard, you are speaking from God, acknowledging what is already true in the unseen realm. This is how I prayed before raising Lazarus, this is how I prayed before every miracle, and this is how I want my followers to pray, not from separation, but from oneness. Not from need, but from recognition, not from the place of asking a distant God to change things, but from the place of recognizing that in the inner realm things have already changed and only need to be revealed. Jesus also showed me that this way of praying requires a complete change of language. Instead of saying, "Father, please heal this person," you say, "Father, I thank you because you have already healed them." Instead of pleading, "Lord, I need provision," you acknowledge, "Father, I thank you because the provision has already been released." It's not empty positive thinking or pretending that something is true when it isn't. It's standing in the inner room, in the place of union with God, and from that elevated perspective seeing what is already true in the invisible, even though it hasn't yet been revealed in the visible. This is the faith I spoke of when I said that if you have faith like a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, "Move from here to there," and it will move. I wasn't talking about believing really strongly with your mind while doubting in your heart. I was talking about the absolute certainty that comes when you enter the inner room. You see from God's perspective and recognize that the mountain has already moved in the realm of cause. Then, when you speak to the mountain, you're not expecting it to obey. You're declaring what is already true and allowing it to manifest. Luz Maria, when you return, many people will tell you that this sounds too mystical, too esoteric, too different from what they've always taught. Some will tell you that you're moving away from the traditional Christian faith. But show them the scriptures, show them that I said, "The kingdom of God is within you," show them that I said, "Go into your room and shut the door," show them that I gave thanks in the past tense before Lazarus came out of the tomb, show them that I said, "I and the Father are one," and I also prayed that all my followers would experience that same union. The words were always there in the scriptures, but without the experience, without the practice, without truly entering the inner room, people read them, but they don't understand them. They interpret them as poetic metaphors or abstract theological statements instead of practical instructions for a real, transformative experience. I then felt a change in the atmosphere. I knew that my time in that glorious place was coming to an end. Jesus confirmed it with words full of love. "It is time to return, Luz Maria. Your body is being resurrected right now." The doctors are applying electric shocks for the 5th time. They are about to give up, but this time your heart will respond. You will return and you will live to share what I have shown you. But before you go, I want you to remember this: you are not returning to create a new religion or to tell people that everything they have believed is wrong. You are returning to complete what was missing, to restore the lost component, to teach the method I practiced, but which the church forgot to pass on. Everything else, the doctrines, the sacraments, community, and worship all have their place, but without these, without learning to enter the inner room and pray from a place of union, people are left with the form but lose the power. Teach this with humility, patience, and love, not with the arrogance of possessing superior knowledge, but with gratitude for having received a gift you want to share freely. Some people will receive it immediately because their souls have been hungry for it without knowing what they were lacking. Others will need time. They will need to see fruit in your life before they are willing to try, and some will never receive it, and that's okay too. You can't force anyone into the inner room. Each person must choose it for themselves. The light around me began to change, to condense. I felt a magnetic pull toward my distant physical body. Jesus smiled that smile of infinite love that contains all the universes. Go in peace, Luz Maria, and remember, I am always with you, not as someone distant watching you from above, but as the living present.